What do you think about that?
I think I'd like to see more of them. Not trying to take over the podcast here, but ladies and gentlemen, I got a call to action. If you are a dispatcher, you are a scheduler, you are a future mentor, if you have knowledge, you should share this with the world. We're not in competition with one another. We are in competition with ourselves on a daily basis to become better. And we have a distinct opportunity to reach out to the next generation, to prep them to be able to hold that torch. One day we're going to pass it. One day we're all going to retire. But until that happens, we have an obligation to get out to these events, whether it's the ADF, whether it's the NBAA, going to these conventions and sharing our knowledge in the classroom so that everybody benefits. We are not in competition with the next generation. They're going to be the ones that take aviation to a whole new level.
Hello, and welcome to the Business Aviation Collective podcast, which is sponsored by LD Aviation. I'm your host, Lindsay, and I am so excited to have Elias AA Andrews on the call with us. Hello, Elias.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing very good, very good. Thank you very much for taking your time to be on the podcast with us. You have a great background. I want to hear all about it.
Fantastic.
So I guess we'll just jump right in. I am curious to know, where did the aviation passion come from?
For me, the aviation passion kind of has an interesting turn. I originally started out, once I got out of high school, I was kind of looking for what my niche was going to be. And I thought I'd take the path of old Gordon Ramsay there, and I decided to become a chef. I did that for a number of years, and I found out that that's for sure not for me. I love science and chemistry, but there's a bit more to the culinary world. I ended up joining the military, and I was exposed to aviation in that way. I'll be honest, I've never taken a flight in my youth, anything leading up to it. My very first flight I took leaving a MEF station in Pennsylvania and headed out to Fort Benning, Georgia. So it was there that I took my first flight, and I was definitely intrigued by that point, but I've already decided and signed on to the fact that I was going to get into flight operations and flight dispatch at that moment.
Nice. Very cool. So that was kind of the beginning of your career. How old were you at this point then?
I would have been 20 at that point in time.
Okay. So pretty young. Still pretty young. Okay. Awesome. So then where did you go after that first flight? How did that train?
So after that first flight, I was taken, I'll be honest. I was very passionate about what happened there. I love the customer service element of it. Never been to an airport. So this was all new experiences for me. Once I got into the military, I did my basic training, and then I was shipped off to Fort Rucker, Alabama, the home of Army Aviation. And so while I was there, I attended the schoolhouse. They're like, you're going to be a flight operations expert. And before anybody gets too excited about that, it's actually quite a boring title once you start breaking it down. I went in there, and they said, you're going to be working on the operations side. And I was like, well, Black Ops, this is going to be kind of cool. And they're like, no. And so as I kind of progressed through the class, I started to realize lots of paperwork. I was like, all right, this is going to be a little bit boring, a lot of records. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be a little bit boring. And then I got the opportunity to go to my first assignment, which was the 101st Airborne Division in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And they gave me the opportunity to choose whatever unit I wanted. I was like, man, I just got done watching that HBO Band of Brothers. I'm in, right? I'm going to go 506 Infantry Regiment. We're going to have a good old time. They've been around since World War II. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
So I went to the 101st Airborne Division. I got there, and as soon as I got in, I was like, this is going to be great. I'm going to work in flight operations. And they said, no, you're going to do schools. And I said, I don't know what that is. And they said, well, basically what's going to happen is you're going to start scheduling people for classes. I said, okay. So I started doing that. I was like, where are the aircraft?
Yeah.
When am I actually going to work with the aircraft? And then this actually started to kickstart my educational background, because as I started booking people for classes, they were short on instructors. They're like, can you watch these people in this class and just go through these slides? And so I started to get a little bit of the educational side early on. And then once we deployed to Afghanistan, then all the schools went away, and it was just tactical operations at this point in time. Now I'm tracking flights. Now I'm working with helicopters and fixed wing on a daily basis. So that's really where it started to kickstart.
Okay. Now, how long of a time span was this before you kind of moved to Kentucky until you were actually doing flight scheduling with the aircraft?
So I probably did schools for about 6 months, and then, hopped on a plane, went out to Afghanistan, and it was just nothing but aircraft from that point.
Okay.
There was definitely something to that, and I wish I could explain exactly what it was. It was a feeling thing. It was a very, very feeling thing. As I got into the operation, as I started working with the aircraft, while the training was going on, I just got it. It just made sense. And it was such a weird thing. It was like a button clicked, I turned a corner, whatever people want to refer to it as. But there was definitely a change in me where I identified that I found my calling. Like this was clearly it. Even though I had kind of reservations going into it, it was at that point in time, I could clearly see that the future for me was definitely going to be aviation.
That is so cool. I think a lot of us get that, and then you might, and we'll talk about this too, you might try and leave aviation and go do something else for a while. And for most of us, it pulls us right back in. At least it was for me. While you were doing all of that coordination, is there any, differences you could talk to us about between scheduling military aircraft versus scheduling domestic general business aviation aircraft?
Absolutely. I think that there's a vast difference. I think the culture is probably the number one thing that I would touch on is culturally speaking on the military side, there's no such thing as a no. It's a no for now, right? Versus on the civilian side, there are definitely times where you have to tell somebody, no, this can't happen. This is not something that's achievable. And obviously the risk assessment between the two of them can be vastly different between what's going on in a combat zone versus what is obviously happening, just a leisurely charter flight or a business charter flight, something to that effect. The feeling is going to be a little bit different on that one. As far as the scheduling goes, I found they actually use quite similar systems. I did notice some of the scheduling systems I was using on the military side, just they turned the background green. Was the only big difference between the two. It was military grade for anybody that doesn't know the exact definition of that, but that was the lowest price point they could possibly find. So it was cheap software, but it did the job.
All right. Good to know. Oh, that's funny. What aircraft did you get to work with?
So I worked with all the conventional helicopters. I got to work with UH-60s, CH-47s, our attack and observation helicopters as well. I got to work with Sherpas, and Sherpa is just basically a very small kind of a King Air aircraft. I call it the box turtle. It's a very squared off aircraft. Probably the most unaesthetic aircraft that has ever existed in time and space. Time and space. But those were the ones I got to work with. And then we also had a civilian unit attached to us as well. They brought in a couple of civilian aircraft. I want to say Puma was it, but I don't remember the nomenclature for that.
Very cool. All right. So then what did you do after that, or how did you transition out of that position?
All right. So after Afghanistan, came back stateside, ended up going out to Egypt. And this is a blast, by the way. When I was out in Egypt, I got attached to a purely utility helicopter setup, and I was working with the French Air Force, which absolute blast. And that's generally the concept of the MFO is basically it's a peacekeeping concept between Israel and Egypt after their massive war. And so there's a whole bunch of contingencies out there. So you have America out there. I think Japan pays for all the food that we eat. The Colombian military was out there. Uruguay, Paraguay, Canada. So there were a bunch of them. And I apologize if I'm missing any contingencies out there. Oh, Australians with the Kiwi as well. So we got New Zealand out there. But each one of them does a little bit different thing. We've got pretty much every one of them has their department that they take care of. For instance, the Hungarian military, they're the police. So each one has its section. Most of us have an aviation section just because of the way that Egypt is kind of set up. It's hard to get around on ground. It's a lot easier to get around on air.
Okay. So
when I was there, everything was calm, cool, relaxed. And then I requested to go to South Camp, which is right outside of Sharm el-Sheikh. For the listeners, if you're not familiar with Sharm el-Sheikh is to Europe what Cancun is to the United States. So it's a party city. There's a lot of like limelight going on and all that stuff. Celebrities pop up. It's a good time. But I'm there for flight operations, and I'm a very disciplined person. I didn't get involved in that particular thing, but we were doing a lot of flights, a lot of sling loads. So we were taking a lot of stuff out to the outstations to supply all the service members out there.
Oh, that sounds really cool. No, okay. Before I'm going to interrupt for a sec. Now, are you interacting then with all of these different people from all over the world, like the different parts, the different militaries that are coming in?
There were some that were a little bit more difficult than others, and I feel really bad being from the Southwest, but my Spanish is very, very limited. So I was not able to do a lot of coordinating with Uruguay, Paraguay, Colombia. I spent a lot of time more with the French and the American-speaking countries. just because that was a language that we shared and we were able to coordinate in that way. My cohort spoke Spanish, so he went that direction, and he was really happy, obviously, that I was handling the French contingency. Though those languages have some parallels, it's still a language barrier.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Okay, sorry, I interrupted you. And
no worries.
So you're bringing out supplies.
Yep, just bringing the supplies out to him and just coordinating flights, running a flight schedule. Also, we were the air ambulance unit there as well. So we were doing a lot of air ambulance flights for things that have happened. Usually like work accidents, nothing really crazy. Had a really tough situation where somebody got attacked at a nightclub and ended up breaking all the bones in his face. So we, as quickly as we could, got him on an air ambulance, got him out to Beersheba in Israel. And he underwent surgery at that point.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I had just a little bit of time left on my contract. So I then headed back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and did another tour for like 3 months, whatever was left on my contract.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I got out and ended up working at a hospital doing air ambulance.
Oh, okay. So that's kind of what you learned there, translated over into the hospital. Okay. Can I back up just a second?
Sure.
I'm curious about how did they run the schedule? I'm always curious on how people do that. So does the military run, people are like in the office 24/7? Did you guys work rotating schedules?
So we didn't run a full 24/7. We did in Afghanistan, but like for Egypt, for example, it was limited to roughly around 16 hours because it was a non-combat operation. So we tried to maximize daytime hours. So obviously we start quite early, go out, do physical training, and then we'll go get breakfast, shower, and then head into the office, be in the office by like 7 a.m. And we're flying until nighttime. And then we'll do a couple hours of night flying, IFR occurrences, that type of stuff.
Okay.
But the schedule it's a packed schedule. We got a lot of pilots, a lot of aircraft, a lot of blade time. So any opportunity we got to fit something in, we definitely would. As I'm sure everybody's aware, as we start scheduling things, it is our dream to have a schedule come true, but it very rarely does. And so as things start to fall off the schedule, we try to replug them with other assets.
Sure. That totally makes sense. Yep. So at least that skill or that need is translatable between military and domestic ops, I guess. So.
Absolutely.
Very cool. All right. So then you popped back to Kentucky and you went to a hospital.
Yep. So I worked at a hospital for, I want to say a year and a half, maybe 2 years in air ambulance. At that time, I started realizing that if I'm going to have any future in here, I definitely have to go large scale. I got to be thinking about my college degree. I got to be thinking about getting my certificate for aircraft dispatch in order for me to assume a flight dispatch role of some type.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point in time, I enrolled with Jepson and Sanderson in Denver. I had spoken with the program manager there and obviously went through all the paperwork. And he's like, come on down. Went down there. It was a 6-week program. It was rough.
Right.
It was very, very intensive, as you'd expect a 5 or 6 week program to normally be. You're prepping for the oral and practical and the written at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Now, how many people were in your class approximately? 25.
I had the full class.
Yeah, that's a huge class. And I mean, Jepson does a great job. I've had some classes. I did do my license with them, but they do a wonderful job and they have classes, I think, continuously going on. Did you have a lot of people in your class that were from other countries?
Yes. Yeah. I would say probably about 50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did too. That's wonderful. It's really great.
There seemed to be a lot from the Middle East, and one that actually kind of surprised me was we had a couple of people from Mongolia, which, don't get me wrong, I knew it was a country, but you never really cross lives with anybody from Mongolia. And to be fair, ever since that day, not yet. So it's rare.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a cool opportunity to kind of find out, because there are obviously going to be cultural differences internally within any country. And so meeting people of even different cities of the same country can be vastly different. My greatest example would be if you met, say, me from Salt Lake City versus me from New Orleans would be two entirely different me's.
Sure. Well, different environments create different, I guess, pieces of our personality.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely. I just think it's really cool, all the different people you must have had access to and experience with. I mean, you get to see what it's like to live in Egypt, even the differences in different states, because you've been to, if I'm not mistaken, quite a few different states to live in. You've got Pennsylvania, Florida, Kentucky, Alabama, and New Orleans as well, or the Louisiana.
No, I've gone through there, but I myself have not there any long term. Arizona, Montana, and Minnesota.
Very cool. So before we started the podcast, we spoke about the fact that I'm from Minnesota originally, and now you're living very close to where I grew up.
That's correct. I'm out here in the Twins and just absolutely enjoying your former state. Well, what do you refer to it as now?
Yeah, I guess you could say former state. Yes, because while I love Minnesota, I don't know if I'm going to be popping back there unless the temperature in the wintertime goes up by about 50 degrees.
Doesn't seem like that's happening.
No. I'm curious too. What's your Montana? Where did you get to stay or live in Montana?
So there's a part of Montana that's referred to as the Banana Belt, and it's actually the warmest part of the state. So I'm not going to pretend like I've got my Montana roots in any way, shape, or form. I got a very mild version of Montana in that way. But there is this beautiful lake out there called Flathead Lake, and I lived in a place called Kalispell.
Nice. Kalispell is beautiful.
Absolutely.
So I lived in Bozeman and Big Sky, and I know we're getting off track, but I love Montana also.
Been through Bozeman a couple of times. It's really nice.
Right? Yeah, I love it. Okay, so I'll reverse back. So now you're working at the hospital and you're running the ambulance flights, which seems to me like it would be very stressful and almost emotional because I'm assuming some of those people didn't make it.
From what I've heard, I have to go on what I've heard because for me, it was not. Okay. From most people that I spoke to, it takes a very unique person to do air ambulance. Because you need to be able to detach yourself from the situation, which after years of being in the military, not a problem for me at all.
Okay.
But I have met a lot of people that just emotionally was too much of a roller coaster for them being there. We've all got loved ones. We would hate to see the day that they're hurt, and dealing with people that are in their worst situation that they've ever experienced in their life on almost a daily basis can be a very, very dark place for them to be. For me, I've always taken it from more of a positive aspect. Somebody is always going to get hurt, but I'm there to help. And you keep that in mind at all times. Air ambulance isn't bad. And when it comes to the stress of them, I tell you, it's like water on a duck's back. It's going to hit you. You got to let it roll off. And remember that stress is an internal thing. That is how you're feeling about something, not necessarily the situation itself.
Very good point. And something that we should all think about, just not only air ambulance, but in every aspect of our life. It is an internal piece of it. Good way to manage that stress. On a more technical side, how long did the crew have to show up for this flight? Or did you have people like sitting in the office all the time?
Yeah, so the way air ambulance works is a little bit more like a firehouse, right? You have people that are on shift, and then when something goes down, they're going, right? Okay. So they are staged there at the location near the aircraft, and then they're going to go out and recover and help aid in whatever situation it is. We did have the distinct privilege of also having a PC-12. So we would go from helicopter, recover them from maybe a crash site, bring them in, stabilize them, then get them back out to the airport to where they could be flown to a much larger hospital facility. To be fair, Kalispell does not really strike the world as having the best, most elite care when it comes to healthcare, but for the area, it's about as good as it gets. So being able to transfer them to a better surgical team is not always a necessity, but always a benefit.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see, I had a question about this though. When I had spoken with somebody else who was doing air ambulance, he had to be very careful about the weather because oftentimes accidents occur because you have bad weather. And then how do you fly and how do you decide to fly that helicopter over to this area that might have really bad weather? Maybe it's icy or snowing, especially in Kalispell.
Absolutely. So when we're scrambling an aircraft, we're doing all the natural things that you would expect in a flight operation. We're checking for notice, we're checking the weather, making sure that everything is going to be safe. There are times where conducting a flight is not going to work. Being out in Kalispell, we weren't too far from Glacier National Park. There were a lot of injuries in there. People get too close to the edge of a cliff and some bad things happen. And, as weather rolls in, we have to start to look at other options when it comes to this type of stuff. And, having such an incredible group of Rangers and having such an incredible group of search and rescue, when we couldn't do it, they were very understanding and they were very good at what they did and still were able to recover. Air ambulance will always be this asset that when available is great to have, but we always have to make sure, especially during emergency planning, that we have contingencies.
Sure. Totally makes sense. And I think I jumped around a little bit. So you got your dispatch license from Jeppesen before going to the air ambulance?
During.
Yeah, okay.
So I was there, I want to say about 2 years, about a year into it. I was like, I'm going to use this lull in my career as an opportunity to go out and get that. And then we'll kind of see where to go from there.
Nice. When you came back with that dispatch license, because I'm always curious to tell people whether it's worth it to get that dispatch license or not. Did you really see that you came back to the job and you were like, oh my gosh, I understand so much more of this? How did that affect that?
No, the reason why I didn't think it really did an awful lot for me from the air ambulance side is because we're still dealing with small aircraft that are only capable of so much. When I went to that particular course, that course was very much built on large scale Part 25 aircraft. And so a lot of the techniques, skills, and all that stuff that I would normally have benefited from, I didn't benefit until I got into the airline. When it comes to like the stuff that most people would get from this, your weather analysis, your NOTAM analysis, that type of stuff, I had that previously just because I've been in the industry for a number of years leading up to it. Where somebody that just goes in fresh into it, they would have gotten a lot from it versus me. It wasn't until about a year later that I really started to benefit from it.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. So after the air ambulance, you got your experience there. Then where did you head to?
I transferred after speaking to my professor from Jepson. I went to him. I basically said, I know something in the military that we hold dear, and it's always make sure that your very first job in a specific industry is the worst possible one that you have, because you can only go up from there. It'll never get worse. And so
good idea. Yeah.
I asked him, and don't worry, we're going to be safe in this. They're out of business. I asked him what was the worst airline that's going to teach me all the best lessons that a person can learn as an aircraft dispatcher. And he told me there's this place in Cheyenne, Wyoming. It is called Great Lakes.
Okay.
Said,
yeah.
Okay, I'm there. Let's do it. I went, I interviewed. Yeah. And I'm going to be honest, I botched the interview. Like I've got somewhat of a reputation of like 3 of the worst interviews probably on the planet. That was one of them.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay. So you got to now give us a hint on what was it that went wrong?
Oh, you know what? I didn't really take the time to sit back and really study the questions that I should have. I was like, I'm working with aviation every day. I don't need to prep for an interview, which my mindset was. A very, very different mindset as I've gotten a little bit older. But back then, being the young gunner, I went in there and I was just gonna answer whatever questions came up. And it was a regulation question, and I misquoted the regulation question. And I think it was something to the effect of, if I wanted to start a drug testing program, which part would I do? And I quoted one of the 121 regulations, and that's a Part 120. And for that reason, I was like, oh no. But I still ended up getting the job and heading out there, because the rest of it was fine. But that one, I was like, oh no. If there's one thing a dispatcher's got to be good at, regulation seems like it's going to be up there.
Yep, regulations. So prep for your interviews. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so what was it like working there?
Oh, it was manic. Oh, it was horrible. Oh my goodness, was it horrible? It was entertaining. It was laughable, but it was a teacher, and that's what I was looking for. I needed a situation to mentor me, not a person, right? And so I would go there, and there would be an insane amount of pressure to dispatch illegal flights. It was crazy how many just questionable pressure situations. I remember one time I was dispatching a flight from Phoenix, Arizona to LA, and somebody came in. I'm not going to name any names. Somebody came in with a lot of power, with an executive title, that said, we're going to divert this aircraft. We're not going to put these people on it. We need to send this aircraft up to this other location to pick up my best friend's son who just got let out of jail. It was the wildest things, like absolutely.
Oh my gosh, that is pretty crazy.
I've never seen asset abuse like I did in that company. But
that's crazy.
What was beautiful about it, why I will always be a Laker and why I will always love that company, was the people. I mean, we were all in it together. It was shared misery, but it was a positive misery at that, I like to call it, because every single day was something new. Something else was being tried. We were pushing on regulations. And when people continue to push you to do illegal things, you tend to get really good with regulations. You get really good with weather. You become a more staunch dispatcher when you get in those situations where you don't have support, where the only support you have is black and white.
That is a very good take on that. I love that. The more you have to push on that, the better you are, is exactly what that regulation means.
Absolutely.
I love it.
And some other stuff that I really learned from there as I was kind of going through there, because I did, again, start to chase more of an educational point. Once I got to Great Lakes, I started teaching part-time as a dispatch instructor. That's where I got my start. And as I'm going through the Great Lakes portion of my career, I then started to realize that there are certain tracks that exist within dispatch in the airlines that may not necessarily be identified early on. So there's a management track, but there's also an educational track that I didn't know existed. I just thought everybody goes there, you dispatch, and then you dispatch until you retire.
Mm-hmm.
I get there, my mentor there identified, are you going to take the management track or the educational track? Because you're already teaching, so I think you're going to take the educational track. And I said, no, I think I'm going to do a little bit of both. And he said, you can't do both. And I said, watch me. And so one thing that I am is I am a rebel at heart and will always will be. One thing is I like to go out there. I like to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and really learn the full scale. Because to me, knowing how an airline works in the full big picture is an incredibly important thing. And so as I was teaching classes and I was picking up supervisory shifts and later on management shifts and getting my chief dispatch position, I was able to do all of this. And he came back to me. He was like, I was wrong. I didn't think it was possible to do both of them. And I said, yeah, now I know both of them. Now I'm not going to be the education side. I'm going to manage permanently over here, but I'm also going to be managing the educational side. And now I understand it.
Great. That's awesome. And so you said yes to every single opportunity that came across your path.
To this day.
So important.
If my president comes down on a Friday night and she's like, I've got this thing, I'm doing it 100%. I've just volunteer for everything, learn as much as you can along the way. I mean, even in Great Lakes, when I wasn't dispatching, I was working as a station agent. I was working throwing bags. I was working as a fueler. I was working as a crew scheduler. Every opportunity I got, just because I could learn things from that. My mentor came up to me one time and he told me, you better stop that. I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, they're not going to pay you to do all this stuff. I said, the payment is in knowledge. If you look at how much a college degree costs, you'll find out how much I'm actually getting paid. The most expensive thing in our nation is education. So I'm actually getting paid more than everybody in this room right now.
There you go. It's very true. And I think sometimes we forget about that piece, right? We just forget about all of what either we can, and then it comes down to what is my per hour charge for me to sit here and help. And you never know when you're doing something on a daily basis, you learn how to do it. In 5 years, that could become the best knowledge you ever learned because it maybe helps you get a new job or advance in your current one. You never know. All right. So you're managing education, you're managing scheduling, dispatch. Then where do you go?
From there, I got an opportunity. I reached out to Embry-Riddle. They were the #1 aeronautical university. And I decided that, I'm going to see if I can head out that way. They said they had a really nice hybrid position that would work really well based on what I was doing, where Monday through Friday, I was working at Great Lakes. And then on the weekends, I was doing a little bit of teaching. And that kind of flipped about, I would want to say, the last year of my time in Great Lakes to where I was working at Great Lakes on the weekend. And then I was teaching all. So they saw my ability to run an operation and teach simultaneously. So they brought me out. I was their aircraft dispatch professor. And I also was the chief operations officer for their flight program. Gave me an opportunity to work with flight students, gave me an opportunity to then kind of work with smaller aircraft. And so I got to say, the better part of aviation, I don't want to downplay it, but there's just something about that training area where stress is low, passion is high. And it was an incredible experience. And I did that for a number of years.
Passion is high. I think that must be, you're right, really rewarding. I mean, those people are coming to school because they're so excited about learning to fly, learning all about aviation. What classes did you teach? You taught dispatch. So were there certain core pieces that you were teaching, like a weight and balance section, or what did you teach on?
Absolutely. So as they go through their educational tracks, they're basically being taught everything from a small aircraft Part 91 level kind of situation. And then when I got them, I got them at their very last part of the degree. I was their capstone. And so what ended up happening was I would just transfer the knowledge that they had with the smaller aircraft and say, okay, that's a hydraulic system, but we're going to increase to the hydraulic system. We're going to add more lines, more power. We're going to take a Cessna 172 and we're going to turn it into an Airbus, turn it into a Boeing 777, and we're just going to grow everything. And instead of having one system that does this one thing, we're then going to have duality, triality, quadality. We're going to add systems on top of systems as backups, because once you lose a system, you need to have more options. We're going to be flying higher altitudes. So I was teaching them everything, But I was just upgrading is what I was doing because they knew how to navigate. Well, here's how we navigate on high and route charts. They knew about air traffic control. I'm like, well, this is what the commercial side of air traffic control is going to look like. They knew their weather. And I said, this is what high altitude weather is. These are some of the impacts that once you get above the area in which you don't have any moisture left and everything turns into ice crystals, what is that flying going to be? What is that going to look like? So I got that opportunity to kind of teach them there. And obviously 121 regulations they hadn't been exposed to before.
Very cool. I think, that sounds like an awesome job. So how long, you were there for a couple of years?
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. After you left Embry-Riddle, where did you head to?
Got a great opportunity. I had gotten my degree before going to Embry-Riddle, but I never got an opportunity to use it. And it was in aviation management. And so I've got my dispatch license, I got my degree, and I'm like, where am I going to go from here? And I had the people from Academy College reach out to me, and they said, hey, we've got a business college, we've got an aviation college. We're trying to find somebody that could come in and kind of embrace the whole thing as a whole. And I said, that sounds perfect to me. I mean, it just seems like all the stars are lining up for me to find this perfect team that's out there trying to create a education level that is going to work across the entire mass of business aviation and aviators and aircraft dispatchers all in one house. And if you just look at my resume leading up to it, it's like I was training from the moment I got into aviation.
Yes, you were. You look like that's a perfect fit for you. So what do you do on a daily basis? What do you teach?
Absolutely. So I generally teach really anything, but my core here is going to be flight dispatch. I generally teach 5 hours a day, 4 nights a week. Okay. For the dispatch course. I run a little bit longer course, so it's not as hectic as some of the 5 or 6 week courses. Yeah. I teach a 10-week course, so it's a little bit slower. You get to kind of take the information a little bit slower. My students are out there creating a reputation for themselves, and you could see where some of the benefits to doing that slower courses definitely help them along the way. Testing scores looking really good. So that program takes up, I'd say, about 50% of my day. Okay. Another 50%, I'm going out there. I'm doing PR. I'm doing social media. I'm creating future classes for the college. What else am I getting into? I think that's really it for now. A lot of it is just a lot of curation.
That's awesome. Okay, so I have more questions about the school, but I want to talk a little bit about the social media that you've been working on. So I believe that I know that we saw you're very active in the NBAA Lunch and Learn. They have that once a month, and we see you actively participating there. I also, on LinkedIn, you have a newsletter. You have an actual newsletter that you can sign up for.
Oh, the Stoic Sky. Yeah. Oh, man.
Yes. I love that.
Right there.
So tell us more about that, and maybe even tell the audience how to subscribe to it, because I have to say, I think it's very well done.
Absolutely. So Stoic Sky, you can find it on LinkedIn. If you go to my profile, Elias AA Andrews, and you go on there, you'll see Stoic Sky. It'll give you an opportunity to follow that particular newsletter. I wanted to start my own blog, and I had kind of looked at a couple of different scenarios on how I was going to execute that. And I could go out, I could pay for a website, start my own blog. And I was looking at the price tag and I'm like, that's okay. But when I went on to LinkedIn, they're like, you can just write articles. I said, well, I'm just going to put my blog here. Because to me, it's not about making money. It's about getting the information to the masses. I'm an educator at heart. Yeah. So I went in there and I said, well, what am I going to call it? I ran with a whole bunch of different ones. And I was like, I want it to be educational. Let's go back to the Socratean days. We're going Stoic, right? And so I was like, but you got to get the aviation in there. And so I was like, Stoic Sky, it was a perfect blend. So with that, the premise that I started with was, what's everybody not talking about? You know, there's always these great things. Let's go in there. Let's talk about the airlines. Well, there's 500 articles on the airlines and all that. And I was like, maybe I shouldn't be chasing after that. Let me put together some stuff that maybe people don't pay a lot of attention. For instance, I'm putting out one over the weekend that is going to be just on airport art. It's just one of those things. Like, everybody talks about Denver, don't get me wrong, but there are other really, really great art pieces out there that embody aviation and they're put out there and they're aesthetically pleasing and they're calming. Nice. They're meant to be calming for the passengers. So that'll be the next issue that's coming out. But it is just about finding those little niche areas that I feel like people are overlooking.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. I love it. I agree. I really think it's important to get the unseen or the stuff that's not being talked about And plus, that's interesting because you don't need to read the same article over in
Right.
10 different people's different or similar opinions. So anyways, anybody who's listening, definitely go to his LinkedIn page and find that because it's an excellent newsletter. Okay, so let me switch back a little bit to 10 weeks. I love that you're stretching it out to 10 weeks for that dispatch class. I went in and did mine. It's been a few years now. And I did mine with flight safety, but it was a similar 6-week course, 8 hours a day, very intense. And I have an aviation and at that point had an aviation dispatch or background. But it's a lot of information, especially if you're coming in with almost none. Do your students usually come in with some type of aviation background, or are there some people who are very new to aviation?
It's kind of a checkerboard. I get a little bit of both. There are upsides and downsides to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to know before I start this, I'm not out here to bash my private pilots out there. But generally speaking, some of the people that struggle the most are the people that have just a little bit of aviation experience, just enough to get themselves in trouble, just enough for them to give them a little bit of confidence that they know what they're talking about. When they get into the class, they've already got it in their mind how everything works. But that's VFR.
Mm-hmm.
IFR is a completely different world. We do completely different things. But if you get somebody with a private that has an IFR rating, they tend to do really well. It's weird how that one change in their career does really well. But what's interesting is some of my more successful students are coming in with no experience. And I got to say, as a mentor and a shaper of the future of aviation, I would say getting those people that don't have those bad habits, that this is where we can create the good ones at this base level, and then they'll skyrocket from there, actually tend to do quite well in my course. So, there's a lot of different places that people enter in. Nobody starts their career or their life in the same spot. We all have our own rose-colored world that we have going on. And as we enter in, it's just a hodgepodge of backgrounds. And in the end, most, if not all, are quite successful in the course.
That's awesome. So when they're finished, they graduate, they pass all their written, practical, oral. Where are a lot of them going? Are they going to airlines? And I guess this kind of brings me to, it is mostly airlines. Because my other kind of sister question would be, where and how do they learn about business aviation at Academy College? Is that something that they're, talked to about?
Yes, I do address it with them quite heavily just because naturally my background. So they get a little bit of everything. I try to expose them to every form and facet of aviation. It is very tough because we have to talk about the motivators of dispatch. In my career, I would say I've met very, very few people that from getting out of high school really wanted to pursue a dispatch and scheduler position. It's quite rare. You end up being exposed by usually somebody else in the industry that's like, hey, have you heard of this? So what we end up getting is a lot of secondary career people. And the chances of them wanting to transfer into anything other than the airline become slim because they went out, they chased their passion, they were unsuccessful with it. Now they just want to get paid a lot of money. And when you go to the airlines, there's a lot of money. But if that's your only motivator, then that's where you end up. But if your motivator is people, if your motivator is great core teams and all this other stuff that we have available in business aviation, that one small change that I'm trying to make with my students to get them to understand is it's okay to go to the airlines and it's okay to make a lot of money. But my number one quote that's probably going to go out there forever is if you want to go to the airlines, you want to make money, you should go do that. But first, before you do, go have some fun with your career. Go do something different. Go work for that science company that they have in New Zealand that goes down to Antarctica. Go work for Disneyland that does charter operations in and out of there where you get to eat at a different country every single day because you're at Disneyland, Go have fun with your career first. Go spend the next 5 to 7 years just doing something absolutely unnecessarily dumb. And then go to the airlines and then you can get a good retirement, you get your flight benefits, everything you ever wanted. But go have fun.
Because... And I haven't done airline dispatch, but I did an internship. But an airline job is what seems to me quite similar every day. You may have some different things that pop up, but basically you're working the same flights every day. Whereas my job now is literally something different every day. The destination is different. The aircraft is different. The crew is different. Everything's different. Keeps me on my toes.
Absolutely. For the airlines, it is a constant grind. It is monotonous in that way, in that it is the same flight schedule over and over again. And it has to be in order to attract the type of customers that we're looking for. Our customers are wanting to book their their vacation 9 months in advance, 2 years in advance. So they're wanting to get access to these tickets long before. So we end up being just this rigmarole of just constant similar schedule over and over again. The complexities obviously come with the weather and the maintenance schedule and trying to get all to this never-ending dance between takeoff and landing in a safe aspect. So it is in that way that it does become a little bit more of a challenge and a little bit interesting. But as far as the flight schedule goes, I mean, we're only changing it if we have to. Just plug in the holes where they come up.
Sure. Yep. Okay, I want to switch back to something that you said just a moment ago. You said you consider yourself a mentor and a shaper. And I want to hear all about that because I'd love that.
Absolutely. So I do a lot of mentoring, shaping in a lot of different ways. So first off, I'm obviously a professor here at Academy College. I get a whole different walk of students across the board. I get pilots, I get business, I get aircraft dispatch. I'm training all of these people for their own discipline and the disciplines that I have. I try to provide them as much not only scholarly advice, I try to provide them as much personal advice as well as they kind of not only grow into great aviation representatives, but great men and women as well. You know, as we all know, life is hard. And so having anybody to kind of direct you in what right looks like and how to execute that life in the safest way possible, I do that. I'm also an advisor and a mentor for the Honor Society, which is the high level academic side. So anybody that's wanting to get into flight operations, flight dispatch can go on to the Honor Society and just request me as a mentor, and I'll provide you with whatever advice I can as you go from high school transitioning into the college area. On top of that, I'm an officer for Toastmasters, so getting in there and identifying how to help people become better speakers as well.
Mm-hmm. Toastmasters, great program. I think I didn't pass that one very well, but yeah, it's like it's great. I've been there. It's hard. Yes, it's not brutal, easy. Right? You don't get to just go show up and sit in the back.
Yeah,
that's so cool. I love that because we've been talking about this in aviation for a long time, especially business aviation. We just don't have enough people coming into the industry. You are uniquely positioned to help in that area, which I see you doing that by putting out your newsletter, by attending the NBAA Lunch and Learns. And you also go to the actual event. Any suggestions? I'm going to ask a couple questions. First one is, any suggestions for those of us who have maybe been in the industry for a while and we want to mentor and help shape other people coming into this industry? How do we do that? Any good suggestions?
So as far as establishing yourself as a mentor, most companies are going to be open to the idea of about a mentor program. The reason for that is obviously to have a senior employee taking a junior employee and helping them understand the thing. That is a force multiplier right there. You are going to take a junior employee and turn them to a mid-level employee in a matter of months. Like that right there, every company should be investing in mentorship programs. So it shouldn't take much on that side. Beyond that, you don't have to walk over and treat it like a marriage, like you're going to pop a question or anything like that. You can walk over and say, hey, do you want me to give you some advice on what you're doing? Most people, I like to believe most people are open to advice. I want to say like MIT did a study back in the day about the relationship between pilots and dispatchers and said that 97% of pilots are open to advice from dispatchers. We would love to hear somebody else's perspective. I mean, look no further, a podcast. You know, people aren't in this conversation. They're just listening to us, but they're there. They're feeling it. They're understanding the perspective. Well, why'd they go on to the podcast? They wanted it because they wanted to hear somebody else's perspective.
Yeah.
And so it's just being a mentor is just simply showing up. That's what it comes down to. Show up, be reliable, and provide your input.
Very cool. So that could even be like your local high school, probably, or I suppose it could be middle school. Even you could grab kids in the younger section. NBAA, I think, has a mentor program as well. You can sign up to be a mentor or receive mentoring as well. Before the podcast started, you and I were kind of talking about the fact that there are some really great people in this industry. Maybe they're not the ones that we see every day, maybe at the events or speaking out loud, but I think there's a lot of people who have good information to share. What do you think about that?
I think I would like to see more of them. Not trying to take over the podcast here, but ladies and gentlemen, I got a call to action. If you are a dispatcher, you are a scheduler, you are a future mentor. If you have knowledge You should share this with the world. We're not in competition with one another. We are in competition with ourselves on a daily basis to become better. And we have a distinct opportunity to reach out to the next generation, to prep them to be able to hold that torch. One day we're going to pass it. One day we're all going to retire. But until that happens, we have an obligation to get out to these events, whether it's the ADF, whether it's the NBAA, going to these conventions and sharing our knowledge in the classroom so that everybody benefits. We are not in competition with the next generation. They're going to be the ones that take aviation to a whole new level. You could not have convinced me when I got in aviation that drones would be doing what they're doing. You couldn't have convinced me when I got into aviation that we would have these brand new aircraft coming in that are going to do the urban flights. You couldn't have convinced me of that. I thought those were going to be things of the future, but the call to action is get involved.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I think you really said that. It is an obligation for those of us who have this knowledge to go out and help. I really don't think we can sit back and just say, hey, I'm busy. I have too much to do. It is our job to help the next generation coming in.
Absolutely.
It can look like all sorts of different ways. It can look like speaking at MBAA. It could be even just going to the lunch and learns and participating in that discussion. It could be all sorts of things. But I really, really agree with what you're saying. Everybody needs to get out there and help.
Absolutely. Cool. And if I could provide just a little bit of advice for people that are going out to these conventions, you're going to go there. You're going to feel like you're outcasted. You're going to feel all this stuff. It's not real. It's paranoia. Get out there, talk to people. If you see me, don't be afraid. Walk up to the bearded man and say, hey, AA, I'm going to talk to you. And I don't even have anything to say because we're there to communicate. We're there to network. If anybody gets an opportunity, I put out a piece about networking and how we're basically all trees at the end of the day. Trees all work in unison to help one another out when it comes to passing nutrients. It's a network that I like to call the Wood Wide Web. We've got our own network as human beings, and you just got to get out there. You got to start having conversations. Don't even talk about aviation. Just go talk about, cigarette talk. How's the weather? All that stuff. And to be fair, that's kind of aviation driven too. So that's going to lead you to new heights. Truly new heights.
That's such good advice. You're right. Just get out there. I love that event, the S&D event. I mean, one of the largest ones that MBAA has, and wonderful opportunity for networking, meeting new people. Definitely go. Okay, so you talked a little bit about maybe coming up to you and saying hi if you're at this S&D event. What if they maybe don't get to go to the event? How would they get in contact with you if they want to chat with you?
Any social media platform that exists in time and space, it's going to be at Aviation Andrews, or it will be Elias AA Andrews on LinkedIn. I'm on Insta. I'm on Twitter. I'm on, what's the new one that they just put out? I'm horrible with this stuff.
Is this TikTok?
Threads.
Oh, gosh.
I just got on TikTok 2 days ago. I posted one of them. And when I was talking about the tree one, that's on TikTok as well. I think I nailed all of them. Reddit. I go by a different name on Reddit because they wouldn't let me have my original name. So on Reddit, I am Your A Dubness is what I intended with.
That's cool.
So,
all right.
And on Reddit, it's just short stories. You won't find anything really aviation related, but I'm on there as well.
Okay, great. And I meant to ask you this earlier, but what is the AA? What does that mean?
So AA was a nickname that I got when I was in the MFO out there in Egypt. We had the Egypt crisis where the Egypt people were overthrowing President Mubarak for corruption, amongst many other crimes. While I was out there, I was doing a lot of coordinating, going around. We had a lot of different contingencies. We had the Australians, the Kiwis. We had Uruguay, Paraguay, Colombia, the United States, Canada. And I would be going through these different contingencies and just trying to coordinate flights, make sure that we had all the necessary resources so that when we were doing operations and trying to extract Americans out of Egypt so that they didn't get caught in the riots, everybody knew me kind of as a different name. It was either you knew I was Andrews or you knew that I was at the aviation guy because he's the one coordinating all the flights. Mm-hmm. And so they weren't really sure how to coordinate the two of them. So it'd be like, you know where Andrews is? I don't know who Andrews is. He's the guy that's coordinating. Oh, the aviation guy, he's over there. And so the entire nickname is quite a long, drawn out one that we truncated down. I think the whole nickname originally was the ever so random and token aviation guy Andrews. And we then had to truncate it down to Aviation Andrews. And what I go by today is AA. If there's anybody out there that feels that an aircraft dispatcher having the name aviation as being a nickname, and they're like, well, a pilot should have that or something to the effect of it, I want you to calm down. Aviation in military terms, the more appropriate term would be Aviation Regulation Andrews. We identify aviation and flight as being two different things in the military, where in the civilian world, aviation is the overall umbrella.
Makes sense. Oh, that's a great story. So AA.
Yep.
All right. Well, AA, thank you so much for your time today on the podcast. You're truly inspirational. Everybody who's been listening, please reach out, follow him on LinkedIn, and find him at the S&D events or the monthly lunch learns. He'll be there. Say hi.
Absolutely. Anybody reaching out to me, just a quick heads up, I will be over in the Titan area. I will be at the Academy College desk. Academy College shares with Thunderbird. So if you're interested in flying or you're interested in dispatch, come see Thunderbird Aviation, where you can learn to fly, or come to Academy College, where we teach business aviation, aircraft dispatch, and pilot training.
Very cool. Actually, before we close, I should have asked you about that before. So you guys are having a booth. It's along with Thunderbird Aviation. Thunderbird is FBO at the Eden Prairie Airport.
That is correct. So we have an executive FBO at Eden Prairie. We also have a pure flight school at Crystal Airport in Minnesota as well. So we do training from private all the way up to CFII. And, we've got an incredibly great group out here. Most of the people that have flown here have nothing but really great things to say. We have full curriculum and we have a lot of instructors. So come on down and if nothing else, come out for a familiarization flight. Come on out for a observation flight and just see if it's for you. You may be surprised. A lot of people that go out there for those discovery flights find out very, very quickly that they actually have a passion for it. Much like me, you don't know until you get in the aircraft.
That's right. Just do it. Say yes. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. Please stay tuned for more episodes and check out our website for up-and-coming podcasts. This has been a production of the Business Aviation Collective, sponsored by LD Aviation.